About an hour ago, Donald Trump addressed the American people. This follows an address from Prime Minister Albanese of Australia to his people, as well as Prime Minister Starmer to the British people. And in both speeches by Starmer and Albanese, they said to the people, we know that fuel prices, gas prices are going up and we should expect more pain, but we will do as much as we can to ENS to ensure that your wallet is not too impacted. Donald Trump, in his address to the American people, basically said that this war will continue and America may start to bomb energy and oil infrastructure of Iran. Okay? So he's basically saying that we're winning this war and we will bomb them to the Stone Ages, which tells us he's actually not winning this war. So remember, this war in Iran, it's not ending. In fact, many people believe it's only starting to ramp up. So there are rumors that Donald Trump has already authorized the use of ground forces. And so we could see an invasion of Iran as early as this weekend, but definitely this month. Okay, but while America is fighting this war in Iran, this is the Secretary of War, Peter Hex, and he's announced that America will control all North America. Okay, so basically what he's saying is, we will enforce the Monroe Doctrine in North America. So it sounds very strange to people in that Donald Trump is fighting this war in Iran that's not really winnable. At the same time, he is being aggressive in North America. He's seeking fights with Canada, with Denmark, over Greenland, with Colombia, with Mexico, with Cuba. In fact, he's embargoing Cuba right now. People expect possibly an invasion of Cuba very soon. So people just think that Donald Trump is all over the place and he's idiotic. Okay, so this is Iran, and everyone says that a ground invasion of Iran would be stupid because it is much too large to invade. Right now, America has only about 50,000 troops in the Middle East, and the geography, the terrain makes it very hard to control. Okay, so you have these mountains, the Zagros Mountains, which allows for the Iranians to hide and conduct guerrilla warfare and use drone strikes and artillery strikes. And then you have the desert, which makes it very hard to cross. Okay? So even if the Americans were to attack from here, from Iraq, they would have to face the mountains. If they were attacked from Pakistan from the east, they would have to face deserts. Okay? And if they were to attack from the south, they would face all these mountains. And also, you're far away from Tran, which is ultimately your objective. Okay, so there's lots of conversations about what the Americans are trying to do. Right now, the consensus seems to be the Americans first want to control the shoe in order to elevate the strain on the global economy. Okay, but as you can see from this map, first of all, the strait, it's not very wide and it's very close to the Iranian coastline and the mountains, so it's easy to attack from. And there are these, and then the Iranians can put mines all around the strait as well. So what everyone tells us is that an invasion of Iran would just be idiotic. At the same time, the Americans need to free up the shoe and allow for maritime navigation in order to stabilize the global economy. Okay? Already we're seeing lots of signs that America is preparing for a long war. So there are already 50,000 troops in the Middle East, and a lot of them will be deployed against Iran. But also, there was a letter from Leonard Anderson to reserves telling them telling them we must get ready to deploy, fight, and win. Okay? So not only have they sent 50,000 troops to the Middle East, but they're preparing to call the reserves as well. Okay? So this seems as though America is preparing for total war. Polymarket is a very interesting place to understand how global events will turn out. Okay, and so there are 3 indicators that in fact a war is coming. A ground invasion is coming. First of all, the Peace Pizza Index is exploding. What does this mean? It means that in the Pentagon, when they're preparing to launch a ground invasion, they need to work overtime, and so they call for pizza, okay? And so pizza deliveries are going up, gay bars are empty, okay? So when people are, don't have much to do, they go and, go on dates. The last is that people are making bets, large bets that a ground invasion will happen, okay? So these are people who have inside information, and so they go on Polymarket and make a bet that this will happen. Million will happen. So this guy bet $200,000 that a granuation will happen, and if it turns out a grandation does happen, he will win over $1 million. Okay? So these are three very good indicators that a grandation has been approved, and it will happen very, very soon. Donald Trump himself has said many, many things. Okay? So he said that, you know what? If we leave the Middle East, it's not our problem. We don't really care. Okay? And he also says that, hey, NATO, it's your responsibility to open the Strait of Hormuz because we told you so, and because you need the oil. And of course, NATO is angry at Donald Trump because previously Donald Trump threatened to take over Greenland. Okay, so everything's Donald Trump is just uptight. He doesn't plan ahead because before this war in Iran and where he needs the help of NATO, he was pissing off NATO by threat to take over Greenland. So Donald Trump is all over the place. He's just a Biden, right? Let's just assume, okay, that the ground invasion goes ahead. What will happen? Well, as I predicted before, if a ground invasion were to go ahead, first of all, America would lose this war because the ground invasion would fail, and the Iranians are fully prepared for ground invasion. Second of all, if America loses war, the American empire would die because we forced out of the Middle East. They would lose the petrodollar and the US dollar as a global reserve currency. The third thing is the global economy would collapse. So clearly, Donald Trump is the worst president in human history and he's a complete buffoon, right? Okay, but let's put our thinking caps on. Okay, let's use game theory and say, but what if for some strange reason Donald Trump wants to lose his war in Iran? What if he wants the American empire to collapse? What if Donald Trump wants to destroy the global economy? Then he'd be a genius, right? Right. He's a pie because he's going to destroy the American empire. But if he actually wants to destroy the American empire, then the man is the greatest American president ever. Okay? Okay? So we're going to have a fun class today, and we're going to make the argument that in fact, Donald Trump is a genius. That in fact, all this chaos is purposeful. That there's actually a plan behind all this. Okay? That's the argument I want to make to you today. Okay, so what is the plan? What is going on here? All right, so first thing to notice is that the world gets 20%, okay, 20% of its oil from the Middle East. Okay, primarily going to East Asia. So India gets about 6% of its oil from the Middle East. Japan gets 75% of its oil from the Middle East. So East Asia is heavily dependent on Middle East oil, okay? But as you can see, it also goes to Europe as well, and then also to the United States, right? So the world is dependent on the GCC oil. If this war continues, if ground forces are used, then all the oil from the Middle East collapses. And JP Morgan has come out and said that by mid-April, the world will run out of oil. Okay? So this is a disaster for the world. But it's not, it's just much more than energy needs. Okay, so because Iran is constraining movement in the Strait of Hormuz, we're seeing 7 major shortages. Okay, so yes, we know oil and LG are being stopped. Okay, but actually the problem is much worse because look at phosphate, ammonium, sulfur, urea. This is food production primarily used for fertilizer. In other words, if this war persists, not only will countries run out of energy, they'll also run out of food. Okay, also look at this. Helium and sulfur are used for what? They're used for semiconductors. The production of semiconductors use helium and sulfuric acid in the production of semiconductors, which leads to AI, okay? So in other words, this war in the Middle East, it's impacting everything in the modern economy, okay? If this war continues, the global economy could collapse. But again, we're making the assumption that Donald Trump is a genius, and this is all part of his big plan. Okay, so what is this plan? All right, so okay, we know that there's a lot of oil in the Middle East, okay? But you know, oil is not as rare as people think it is. There's also a lot of oil in Canada. Venezuela has the world's largest oil reserves. Okay, Russia also has a lot of oil. So in other words, if the SH of Hormuz is closed, if this war in the GC continues, it doesn't mean the world no longer has oil. All it means is the world is now much more dependent on North America and Russia for oil. And so the global economy now shifts over to North America and to Russia, okay? So in other words, the United States starts a stupid war in the GCC in the Middle East. It can't possibly win, but it still benefit because now the world is much more dependent on North America, okay? Why is Venezuela important? Because America just took over Venezuela in January, okay? And look, Canada has a lot of oil and Trump is threatening to take over Canada, okay? So now let's look at who needs the oil. Well, this map tells you that if you're in the red, you consume more oil than you export. support. And who are these countries? Well, they're Europe, okay? And they are East Asia as well as Australia. Okay, so yes, I understand Donald Trump is an idiot. Yes, I understand that he's going to lose his war in the Middle East. Yes, I understand he's going to destroy the global economy. But for some strange reason, he benefits and the United States benefits because now Europe and China, Japan, Australia, they are much more dependent on North America for resources, for food, for energy. Okay? All right? Food. Okay? So nitrogen is important for fertilizers. Okay? You need nitrogen for fertilizers. And as you can, and what this map tells you is that if you are in the blue or the light blue, it means you produce more nitrogen than you need. So you exported it. If you are not in the blue, then you're kind of screwed. Okay? So basically, this area, especially this area, okay? Europe, as some parts of Europe, okay? So now they need more nitrogen. And again, before they were getting a lot of nitrogen ammonia from the Middle East, and now where are they forced to get the nitrogen from here and from here, okay? So again, yes, I know Donald Trump's losing this war in the Middle East, but in the long term, America stands to benefit. The last thing I want to look at is water, okay? Water is important because water tells us which areas are the most stable. Basically, if you have a lot of water, you're less prone to conflict. But if you don't have that much water, then you are prone to conflict. Okay, so we look at, so if you're in a dark blue, you're good. Okay, nothing to worry about. If you are in the light blue, you are in a lot of trouble. Okay, so we look at this area. North America, pretty stable because lots and lots of fresh water. Okay, if you look at Russia, pretty stable, lots and lots of fresh water. But if you're Africa, you're in a lot of trouble. If you're Europe, you're in a lot of trouble. If you are Middle East, you're in a lot of trouble. If you are Southeast Asia, you are not in that much trouble, but you are in some trouble. Okay. So, we already see how this map tells us where in the future, basically Russia and the United States, North America are the most stable parts of the world with the most resources, and therefore they are the most resilient, the most stable. Okay, but if you go to Africa, Europe, Middle East, Southeast Asia, these are coins of conflict in the world. So we can expect these places to become much more unstable over time. So in other words, all the United States and Russia have to do is maintain stability and then export resources to these places. And guess what? Then they make a lot of money for themselves. Okay? So again, I understand Donald Trump's an idiot. I understand this war in the Middle East is stupid, but from a long-term game perspective, the United States wins from this disaster from a long-term perspective, okay?